Terrifying bobsleigh crash at Winter Olympics. Austrian pilot Jakob Mandlbauer hospitalized after overturning in four-man final. A dramatic scene unfolded at the Winter Olympics in Cortina on Saturday after Austrian bobsleigh driver Jakob Mandlbauer suffered a serious crash during the four-man final, forcing officials to halt the competition temporarily. Now let's dive deeper and explore every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
I want to take you to a very specific place and time.
Okay.
It's Saturday, February 21st, 2026.
Right in the thick of it.
Exactly. We are in Cortina d'Ampezzo, right in the heart of the Dolomites.
Beautiful area.
Oh, gorgeous. And the air has that, that specific kind of crispness that actually hurts your lungs a little bit when you breathe in deep.
Yeah, that real biting cold.
Right. And the Winter Olympics are peaking. We're at the sliding center for what is, honestly, it's arguably the heavyweight title fight of the games.
The four-man bobsleigh final.
The four-man final.
I mean, it is the event everyone waits for. It's essentially the Formula One of the winter world, but completely without the brakes.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
No breaks at all. And usually when we talk about this event, we're dissecting split times, right? We're looking at the aerodynamics of the sleds, or, we're just counting the medals.
And their usual sports analysis.
Exactly. But today, for this deep dive, we are doing something entirely different.
We have to, given what happened.
We do. We are looking at the exact moment where the engineering fails and, well, the physics just take a really dark turn.
We're talking about the crash of the Austrian sled in the second heat.
Right, the Austrian sled. And I really don't want this to just be a standard news update for you all listening.
No, you can get that anywhere.
Exactly. I mean, anyone can pull out their phone or read a headline that says, sled crashes, pilot hurt.
Right.
But we have a whole stack of sources here today. We've got official race reports, medical updates straight from the Austrian team, and even commentary from former Olympians.
It's a lot to go through.
It is. And I want to use all of this to really understand the anatomy of a disaster like this. Because when you peel back the layers, it's not just about a sled tipping over.
Not at all.
It's about human instinct. It's about the medical protocols on the ice. And honestly, the psychology of a sport that requires you to just be totally fearless, even when you've literally just seen the worst possible thing happen.
It's the absolute nightmare scenario for these athletes. And I think what often gets lost in that quick 30-second highlight reel they show on TV is the sheer complexity of what happens after the crash.
After the dust settles.
Exactly. We need to look at the immediate human response inside that tiny carbon fiber tube.
Yeah.
The very specific split-second medical decisions that get made out there on the freezing ice. And what all of this tells us about the safety margins in a sport that is, at its core, incredibly hostile to the human body.
Hostile, it's a perfect word.
Yeah.
So let's set the stage properly for you. It's the second heat of the finals.
The pressure is already immense.
Huge pressure. The Austrian team is up on the track. You have the pilot, 27-year-old Jakob Mandlbauer.
Right.
And packed in behind him, literally shoulder to shoulder, are Daniel Birchler, Sebastian Mitterer, and Dan Nichols-Barty.
A very experienced crew.
Very. And they are midway through the run.
And I want to jump in here because midway is a really crucial detail in the reports.
Why is that?
Well, in bobsleigh, you aren't just coasting down a hill. By the time you hit the middle section of an Olympic-level track like the one in Cortina, you have built up an immense amount of kinetic energy.
We're talking serious speeds.
Oh, absolutely. You are likely pushing 80, maybe even 90 miles per hour.
Wow.
And the G-forces in those curves, they are literally compressing you down into the floor of the sled.
Pinned down.
Pinned completely.
And then in just a split second, that entire rhythm breaks. The race reports, they simply say the sled tipped onto its side.
Just like that.
Yeah. Now look, I've watched bobsleigh for years, and I've always wondered about this. These four-man sleds, they are heavy.
Extremely heavy.
They look like absolute tanks going down the ice.
Yeah.
How does something with that much mass how does it just tip over?
It's actually specifically because of that mass that they can be so volatile.
Really?
Yeah, think about the physics of it. A two-man sled, for comparison, is a bit like a sports car.
Okay.
It's twitchy, it's very responsive to the steering. But a four-man sled, that's a bus.
A bus.
A speeding bus. It has a massive amount of momentum and, crucially, a much higher center of gravity because you have four very large muscular athletes stacked right in there.
So it's just inherently more unstable if things go wrong.
Exactly. It is much harder to correct.
Yeah.
You are completely relying on centrifugal force to pin the sled high up on the ice wall in those banked curves.
Right, they ride up the wall.
They do. And as long as you are firmly on the runners, those thin steel blades underneath, you have control. The pilot can steer.
But if you lose that angle,
That's the problem. If you take a line that's just an inch too high, or you exit a curve a fraction of a second late and hit the straightaway while the sled is still slightly tilted, gravity wins.
it just pulls you down.
The sled rotates past the point of no return.
And once it's on its side,
That is the truly terrifying part, because once those steel runners lose contact with the ice, the pilot is suddenly unemployed.
unemployed.
There is zero steering. The runners are just up in the air. You are now nothing more than a 600-pound projectile sliding entirely on the fiberglass cowling.
That specific phrase from the source material, sliding uncontrollably, that really stuck with me when I read it.
It's chilling.
It really is. It's not like a controlled drift. It's a complete loss of all agency.
Yes, and it's so different from other racing sports, unlike a race car on asphalt, right?
Right, where you have tires.
Exactly. Tires create friction, they scrub off speed, or even if you spin off the track, you hit a gravel trap that physically stops the car.
But on a bobsleigh track,
Ice has a coefficient of friction that is effectively zero.
wow.
The sled literally does not want to stop. It just keeps going, grinding violently against the track walls, bouncing off the roofs of the curves.
And the sensory descriptions we have in these reports are just visceral. They talk about the sled careering at high speed and scraping along the course.
The noise must be unbelievable.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I cannot even imagine the sound inside that helmet.
It would be absolutely deafening. I mean, a normal bobsleigh run is loud to begin with. It's this deep, low rumble. But a crash. It turns into this high-pitched, grinding scream. It's a composite material and steel just tearing against solid ice. It's the kind of sound that cuts right through the entire venue.
Everyone hears it.
Everyone.
And for the 4 people trapped inside, that noise is their entire world in that moment. Which really brings us to the human element here.
The most important part.
Right. Because we so often think of the team as just a single unit. We say, oh, the Austrians crashed.
Yeah.
But inside that sled, you have 4 completely distinct individuals. You have Mandlbauer at the very front, steering. But then you have Birchler, Mitterer, and Nichols-Barty packed in tight behind him.
And their experience of that crash is horrifyingly different from the pilot's experience.
How so? Walk me through that.
Well, the pilot is holding the steering gearings. He's braced. He is looking down the track, so he sees the mistake happening.
He sees it coming.
He does. The guys in the back. They are completely heads down. They are staring at the floorboards or just at the back of the helmet of the guy right in front of them.
So they have no visual warning at all.
None. They just feel the G-force suddenly change. They feel the entire world tilt. And then suddenly they are sliding sideways. They are effectively just cargo.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
So what do you even do? If you're the guy sitting in the 3rd seat and you feel the sled go over, what is the protocol? Is there a protocol?
The reports actually mention this specific reaction, and I found it fascinating. It says the teammates instinctively ducked their heads.
Instinctively ducked. I mean, it almost sounds too simple. Just duck.
It sounds simple and it's deeply primal, but it's also quite literally the only survival strategy they have available to them.
Because they're totally exposed.
Right. A bobsleigh is open top. There is no metal roll cage over your head like in a rally car.
It's just their helmets.
Exactly. If the sled flips completely upside down, or if it rides high up on the wall while on its side, the only thing between your skull and the concrete hard ice is, well, nothing.
It's just empty space.
So you try to make yourself smaller than the profile of the sled. You retract down into the cowling, kind of like a turtle pulling into its shell, and you just pray that the chassis takes the impact instead of your spine.
It really highlights the sheer vulnerability of these athletes.
Yeah.
You're completely trusting the machine, and you're trusting the pilot with your life. And when those things fail, you are just trusting luck.
That is the brutal reality of the sport. There's no getting around it.
So let's move to the aftermath. The sled eventually finally grinds to a halt down near the finish line,
Right at the bottom.
and the noise finally stops. Now, usually, this is the exact moment where the television broadcast cuts to the team jumping out of the sled, high-fiving, looking up at the clock.
Celebrating.
Right, but here the energy shifts instantly.
It goes from this high-speed, chaotic violence to just absolute stillness.
Right.
And that silence is incredibly heavy.
The track officials immediately rush out onto the ice, and we get our very first piece of real information just from the visual broadcast. 3 of the team members, Birchler, Mitterer, and Nichols-Barty, they managed to get out of the sled.
Which is a massive relief. Seeing them climb out under their own power tells the medical team on site, okay, we have 3 walking wounded here.
Right. They're moving.
Exactly. They might be battered, they might have concussions, but they are mobile and fundamentally okay.
But then the camera just lingers on the sled because Jakob Mandlbauer, the pilot, isn't moving.
And this is exactly where the situation elevates to critical. The reports clearly state he required prolonged medical attention at the scene.
Right.
Now, to the average viewer sitting at home, a long delay on the ice feels like panic. You start thinking, why aren't they getting him out? Why is it taking so long? Get him to a doctor.
I'll be honest, that is always my first thought.
Yeah.
Just get him to the hospital as fast as possible.
It's a natural reaction, but in trauma medicine, speed can actually be the enemy here.
Why is that?
When a pilot crashes, especially in a violent tip-over where the head might have repeatedly hit the ice or the wall, the entire mechanism of injury points directly to the cervical spine.
The neck.
Yes, the neck.
Explain that mechanics a bit. Why is the neck the primary concern in this specific type of crash?
It's a concept called axial loading. Imagine the immense force of the crash compressing the spine straight down from the top of the head.
Oh, wow.
Or consider the whiplash effect of the heavy helmet snapping violently sideways against the ice. If there is a fracture in any of those delicate vertebrae, even just a microscopic hairline fracture, moving the patient carelessly could shift that broken bone.
And if it shifts...
It could sever the spinal cord entirely.
God. So the delay we're seeing on TV isn't indecision from the medics. It's actually extreme precision.
Absolutely. They are assessing him very carefully right there on the ice. They're likely asking him basic commands to squeeze their hands, wiggle his toes.
Checking his motor functions.
Right. They are applying a rigid collar to his neck to immobilize it. They are sliding a hard backboard continuously under him so his entire spine stays in a perfectly straight line during extraction. You simply cannot rush that process.
And we do have some specific medical details that came out from the Austrian outlet Krone that shed some light on what was actually happening during those incredibly tense minutes.
Yes.
And honestly, reading through it, it sounds like there were some very positive signs early on.
There were. And look, we have to be careful using the word positive when we're talking about a crash this severe. But in the strict context of trauma medicine, these are vital, critical signs.
Right.
Krone reported that Mandlbauer remained conscious the entire time he was on the ice.
That has to be the first major hurdle, right?
Right.
Just being awake.
It's massive. A loss of consciousness would suggest a significant traumatic brain injury.
Right.
Staying awake means his brainstem is functioning properly, his airway is likely patent and clear. It is a very good start.
And the report goes on to say that he was able to move his arms, his body, and his head.
And that detail right there is essentially the on-site neurological exam.
Okay.
If you can voluntarily move your hands and your feet, it proves the electrical signal is successfully getting from the brain all the way down the spinal cord out to the extremities.
So it means the cord isn't cut.
Exactly. It tells the doctors that the spinal cord is not severed.
But, and this is a really big caveat in the reporting, he was still transported to the hospital specifically complaining of neck pain.
Right. And that is the red flag that no medic will ever ignore.
Because of what you mentioned earlier.
Yes, you can have a perfectly functioning spinal cord, but a highly unstable column around it.
Meaning the bones.
Meaning the nerves work perfectly, but the bones protecting them are broken or fractured. If an athlete have neck pain after a crash like this, they go straight to the hospital for advanced imaging.
CT scans, MRIs.
Exactly. They need to ensure there isn't a hidden fracture just waiting to cause catastrophic problems later.
So hearing that he was conscious and moving is great news, but it definitely doesn't mean he's fine and ready to go home.
Far from it. It just means the absolute worst-case scenario of immediate permanent paralysis has likely been avoided. But the actual road to recovery from an impact like that could still be incredibly long.
And we really shouldn't forget about the other 3 guys either. Birchler, Mitterer, and Nichols-Barty.
No, we shouldn't.
I mean, they walked away from the sled, but they didn't just pack up and go back to the Olympic Village.
No, standard medical protocol implies they all get thoroughly checked out too. You have to remember, adrenaline is an incredibly powerful painkiller.
Oh, for sure.
In the heat of the moment, you can walk around on a fractured ankle or with a fairly significant concussion and literally not feel it for 20 or 30 minutes. The medical team at the venue has to officially clear everyone involved.
I want to zoom out a bit now. We've talked extensively about the physical mechanics, the physics, and the medical response.
Right.
But There is a huge cultural aspect to an event like this. The athletes and officials, they call it the sliding community.
It is a very tight-knit world.
We saw immediate reactions pouring in from people who know exactly what that kind of crash feels like from the inside. John Jackson, who is a two-time Olympic bobsledder and was commentating for the BBC during the event, he had some really poignant things to say about it.
Jackson is a fantastic voice to bring in here because he completely strips away the national rivalry aspect of the games.
Right.
He said, quote, "As a sliding community, we all want to see each other safe and healthy."
It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Because these teams, they are fighting for tenths, even hundredths of a second. They desperately want to beat the Austrians on the clock.
Of course they do.
But the very second that sled goes over, all of that competition just totally dissolves.
It really does. Jackson noted, nobody likes to see athletes crashing. It sounds like such an obvious statement, but you have to compare it to other sports.
Like football or racing.
Right. In some sports, a crash or a fumble is actually a strategic advantage for the opposing team. But in bobsleigh, a severe crash is just a stark reminder of their own mortality. It shakes absolutely everyone on the mountain.
Jackson also pointed out something really specific about that silence we talked about earlier.
The delay on the track.
Yes. He said on the broadcast, you know things aren't right because the medics are taking a little bit longer to take them off the track.
And that right there is the pure insider perspective speaking. Jackson knows the exact rhythm of a standard minor crash.
Which is what?
It's crash, stop, check your limbs, give a thumbs up, slide the sled off, and clear the track. It takes 2 minutes.
But this was different.
Very different. When the clock just keeps ticking and the track remains closed, the collective anxiety of every single athlete waiting at the top of the hill just spikes. They know exactly what that kind of delay means.
And speaking of the track itself, there was actually another victim in this crash that the reports highlighted. The ice itself.
Yes, and this is a detail that I think really emphasizes just how violent this incident was. The official report specifically mentions significant marks being left on the course surface.
We're talking about solid Olympic-grade ice. It is as hard as concrete.
Honestly, it's harder than concrete in some ways. For a sliding sled to actually gouge that ice, the physical forces involved have to be tremendous.
Right.
You have hardened steel runners and shattered carbon fiber literally digging into the track. It creates deep physical ruts in the surface.
And obviously, you can't just send the next team down a rutted track.
Absolutely not. A rut in a bobsleigh curve is a death trap.
Really?
Yes. If the next sled hits that specific gouge going 80 miles per hour, it could catch their runner and violently throw them into the wall or flip them. It would almost guarantee a second crash.
So while Mandlbauer is actively being loaded into the ambulance at the bottom of the hill, we have this almost surreal scene of Olympic volunteers rushing out onto the track itself.
It's essentially high-speed road repair.
How do they even fix that quickly?
They come out with these literal buckets of slush, which is just a very specific mixture of snow and water and hand trowels. Yes. They had to manually fill the deep gouges, smooth them out perfectly by hand so they match the exact curvature of the wall, and then they often use liquid nitrogen to freeze that slush instantly.
It just feels so incredibly manual. I mean, here we have these high-tech laser timing systems, wind tunnel-tested aerodynamic suits, and the ultimate fix for a broken track is a guy with a plastic bucket and a trowel.
It is entirely manual, but if that volunteer doesn't do it absolutely perfectly, the entire race is over for everyone.
And that leads perfectly into the final and perhaps the most psychologically baffling part of this entire story for me.
The resumption.
The race did continue.
It did.
The track was manually patched, the ambulance eventually left the finish area with the pilot, and the very next team was simply told to get ready.
The show must go on. It is the absolute ruthless nature of Olympic competition.
But just put yourself in the shoes of that next pilot for a second.
I try not to.
You are standing at the top of the hill. You have just watched a rival team get completely destroyed. You have waited 20 or 30 minutes in the freezing cold, letting all your muscles tighten up.
Right.
You have literally watched volunteers patch the very ice you were about to drive over. And now, the light turns green.
That right there is the ultimate test of psychological compartmentalization.
How do you even do that? How do you mentally reset?
You have to have an incredibly short memory. If you stand at the handles thinking about Mandlbauer in the ambulance, or if you're worrying about whether that slush patch on curve 12 is perfectly smooth, you have already lost the race.
You're distracted.
Worse than distracted, fear makes you stiff. And in a bobsleigh, stiffness makes you slow.
So you basically have to just delete the last half hour from your brain entirely.
You have to completely convince yourself that it simply won't happen to you, even though you just saw absolute proof that it can happen to anyone. You have to commit to your steering line 100%. Because if you hesitate on the steer just for a fraction of a second because you're afraid of tipping over, you are actually far more likely to crash.
That is a level of mental discipline that I genuinely struggle to even comprehend. It's one thing to just be brave, right?
Sure.
It's another thing entirely to be brave immediately after actively witnessing a disaster.
It is. And that is exactly why these athletes are different from the rest of us. They acknowledge the risk. In fact, one of the source articles explicitly called this crash a stark reminder of risks.
Yes.
They see the reminder, but they simply do not let it paralyze them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive today, what's the ultimate takeaway for you listening? We obviously aren't looking at a medal result or a podium finish here. We're looking at something else entirely.
I think we're really looking at the reality of living on the absolute edge. We saw the engineering failure, the raw physics of a heavy sled simply losing its grip on the ice.
Yeah.
And we saw the medical success, the rigorous protocol that very likely saved a pilot from a much, much worse spinal injury.
And we saw resilience.
Absolutely. The sheer resilience of the Austrian team, especially Jakob Mandlbauer, who we are obviously wishing a very speedy and full recovery.
Absolutely.
But also the resilience of the rest of the field, the ability of those other athletes to look at that damage, look at the ambulance driving away and say, okay, it's my turn.
It definitely changes how I'll watch the sport from now on.
Yeah.
It's not just a race against the clock. It is a constant negotiation with physics, and physics clearly doesn't always play fair.
It certainly doesn't.
Well, I want to leave you all with a final thought to mull over. Next time you watch these sliders standing at the top of the track, looking so focused and calm, just ask yourself, what is it that allows a human mind to willingly push off the block, knowing exactly how fragile that control really is?
It's a fascinating question.
That's all for this deep dive into the events in Cortina. A frightening moment, a deeply professional response, and a stark reminder of just how high the stakes really are. Thanks for joining us,
Stay curious out there.
and we'll see you
Okay,
next time.
one question for you. Do you think Olympic bobsleigh events need stricter safety checks and advanced monitoring systems after such a terrifying crash, even if it causes longer delays during finals and affects the competition schedule? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.